throwing in as well, also the middle belt of this country. We do know that across the length and breadth of Nigeria this year, we've seen some interesting, and they're saying that it will require security agencies to come up with innovative new ways of dealing with this. Devoe, your comments on this story?
This is a stem off of what we're going to face come 2019. And yesterday, I think many of our colleagues were there at the forum here in Lagos. I think that was at one of our major hotels, where Professor Mahmoud Yakub was explaining on actually the state of readiness.
Mm-hmm.
Now, prime on the list was the insecurity, which we all know, following the Barkin Ladi crisis, alongside the crisis that's been taking place from Zamfara, Adamawa, Borno, Benue, Taraba. Now, he's simply saying that their success is trapped security issues. We know what happened last time. Even if you remember, in the last administration, elections were shifted forward on account of insecurity. Well, he's pleading with the federal government to do their job, because it's not INEC's job to handle the security aspect. That on the part of INEC as the operators, the regulators. We also have the side of voter turnout. There's a threat when citizens feel that they're in harm's way if they come out due to insecurity. So this was a major challenge that he threw up, and is looking forward that the federal government would work effectively to ensure that no Nigerian is disenfranchised. Now, this is on account of their credibility, because if at the end of the day there are places that they cannot carry out the elections, that those voters or those citizens will be disenfranchised, simply because they could not vote. And that takes away from the authenticity or the credibility of the accounts.
Okay. So something else that they mentioned, which I also would like us to talk about, they did talk about the increase in voter registration, especially young people. They say that as of June, about 9.7 million new young people had registered to vote. They're still looking to push that to about 80 million, they say, which is quite a large jump from
they have reached it already. Because he read out some statistics. First of all, there are about 119,000 polling units. There are about 68 political parties registered to date, with about 138 political parties coming through the pipeline. And if they add the 9.7, which they just got recently, to the 69 million that existed before, they will be clearly above 80 million voters. Now, remember, like I mentioned, it's not enough to have 80 million voters on book. The biggest challenge they're facing, even with the insecurity, is getting voters to turn up.
Yes.
What on we know, day. Yes, on that day, or on the days that the elections will take place. If you do remember, in most places, voter turnout as against the registered was from, in some cases, 60% and as low as even 40%. So we are encouraging as many citizens to gear up towards that day, plan ahead, so that you can give your best. Given the crisis, given the breakdown, given the insecurity, given, for me, the lack of government handling in this security crisis, your vote is your opportunity to deal with this. Don't forget it when the time comes.
Okay. And just before we round up, I know that you commented on the several thousand polling units that are up, but 68 political parties. It's the largest number that has been registered in Nigeria's electoral history. They're looking at possibly registering more. Is this necessarily a good thing, Devoe? Because there is some concern as to being able to manage all these political parties and their representatives at the different polling units. Should we not be looking at maybe streamlining how many parties really should be available on the day?
Well, that word streamline and democracy don't go together.
Please we don't like streamlining.
Don't streamline.
We can't streamline.
I have my right to come out even if I only have 2 people supporting me.
Right.
However,
right.
I think at the end of the day, the larger parties will have an advantage, and it's up to the individual parties who are coming up to find a way to pull some kind of synergy to create that critical mass that they need to bring about change.
Devoe, thank you very much for that. There's no streamlining in democracy. All right, I'll bear that in mind. Speaking of streamlining, the DSS attempted to streamline Senator Abaribe. That's what some people think. But the story from the Vanguard newspaper, the headline reads, DSS releases Abaribe after 5 days of incarceration. A rather concerning turn of events. We were told that he was picked up following, in fact, an arrest order that was dated the 2nd of June. And they're saying that they were looking in his house to focus on search for arms and ammunition, any other incriminating documents, because his alleged crime is supporting IPOB. But let's also remember that he was surety of Nnamdi Kanu, who also has been missing since the raid on his house last year. Devoe, your comment. developments?
Well, this is coming out of 5 days of detention, and more news is coming up because the lawyer had been speaking because he did face some difficulties in securing his release. Now, he did state clearly how the DSS searched Senator Abaribe's house squarely and only came out with 27 seized items, of which none were incriminating. Now, he's saying that if he could be detained because he supported IPOB, being the fact that they said on the account that he was supporting a proscribed organization. Senator Shehu Sani, who was alleged to have aided armed robbers, which he had to go to court for. Senator Dino Melaye, which was accused of aiding bandits. Senator Bukola Saraki, who was accused of aiding armed robbers in a massacre of his own people. And then even the former governor of Benue State, Gabriel Soson, who was clamped down for some corrupt tendencies. Well, we are yet to see how this will play out at the end of the day. He also did state that it may not be unconnected to the revelation that the senator made on the floor of the Senate, National Assembly, that 30 billion was snuck into the power budget, of which he was the chair of the committee, and it didn't come to their knowledge.
Now, Devoe, can you just help us understand something? Because the DSS, what exactly is the role of the DSS? And I ask this because we seem to see the DSS come up, especially in political intrigue, whenever, whereas when we look at the insecurity that's plaguing the nation, there doesn't seem to be this sort of proactive movement to uncover who is involved in the mass killings we're seeing across the country, in the mass security problems we have. What is the role of the DSS, and why do they always seem to be in the middle of political intrigue?
Well, they shouldn't be, and they all report to the presidency. But as you do know, within the Department of State Security, that's the DSS, you do now have the SSS, which is a unit within. Prior to this time, they were to handle almost like a CIA, FBI, police kind of structure, where they take on federal matters of concern, while the police handles the state and the regional issues. But recently, we've seen, simply because of the change of power, we've seen them being utilized because they get their command from the federal side, being interfering into political matters. This is the coloration and the compromise that many have been fighting against and speaking up against, that you seem to have a political undertone anytime we see you come out, that if you're coming out this fast, in this case here, okay, in the recent Barkin Ladi cases, a certain faction stated that they had an understanding of what happened. How come the DSS has not reacted? Is this not a matter of federal concern? These are the issues that question the capacity and the integrity of our security forces.
That's very worrying stuff. Thank you very much for that, Devoe. Moving away from the capacity of our security forces, let's go over to the capacity of our drug enforcement agencies. Now, the NDLEA, according to the Premium Times, gives us this headline: Tramadol ban has given a rise to new psychoactive substances. And this was sort of a statement or a comment that came out from the NDLEA commander in Yobe, Afe Rupen, who disclosed this while speaking at the commemoration of the International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking on Thursday in Damaturu. He says that the ban or the arrest and seizure of illicit drugs is on the increase, but that they're trying to wage this credible war against a monster that's eaten deep into the fabric of Nigerian society. Devoe, we've seen bans happen, and to be honest, a lot of people could argue against the efficacy of bans in Nigeria. But the root causes of the sort of drug abuse that we're seeing in the country, the NDLEA doesn't seem to be addressing that. It doesn't seem to be dealing with it. But what are your thoughts on this story, especially as they say, well, they are trying to talk to young pharmacists especially, and see if they can get them out on the streets, out doing questionnaires, and trying to understand the problems of the youth in Nigeria who are on these drugs?
A moment of silence for all those who are suffering from drug abuse. It is an issue it's a silent killer. We really do not, we actually cannot feel the devastation that has taken place, not just among the youth, but even among our female folk scattered across regions in this nation. Because information does not go around all the time, we hardly do hear. In this case, NDLEA is actually shouting. That despite their campaign, they're screaming that despite their campaign against drug abuse, despite the bans that have taken place, of which we know recently in codeine and then Tramadol with the aid of customs, the abuse cases are increasing. Now, what is causing that? Despite the clampdown, that even though you clamp down in one area, they look for an alternative. Codeine wasn't even in the abuse drug some years ago, but I think when there was a serious effort against narcotics, they took to alternatives, and that's when codeine came in.
Up, yeah.
Now codeine is being clamped down. Tramadol picked up; it was clamped down. Other paracetamol is even on the danger list right now. In some cases they're even inhaling petrol. Now they're asking other sister agencies and other interested parties to join them in this campaign to ensure that they can effectively contain this. Now that's the NAFDAC corporation, whereby they're training 20,000 pharmacists who are supposed to get an understanding of how to address the illicit trade war. One. Secondly, these pharmacists are going to be deployed to about secondary schools and basic primary schools nationwide to drive the campaign among students. But I would say this, one of the biggest fallouts of bad governance is that at the end of the day, domestic issues cannot be kept together, and this is the domestic problem because most times people take to
issues, rising insecurity, rising youth unemployment. People are taking medication as a palliative to all these symptoms that are real symptoms. Stress induces some of these symptoms, and we're trying to self-medicate our way out of this, yet the government doesn't seem to be addressing those specific problems.
Even unemployment, which is the greatest one, when you have a lot of idle youth around, what do? They need to expend their exuberance one way or the other. So we can only support them in pushing this call. We expect parents and guardians to also look after their wards. And most times with the daily, in those days we used to see our parents. Now we work 6 to 6. We don't see our wards. We don't see our children. Many times we don't know what they're doing, how they're getting the money they're spending. And with paracetamol being on the danger list, paracetamol, you can get how much paracetamol for 100 naira. So it's become so cheap to even get high or even overdose.
Absolutely.
So it's such a thin line as to how much you can do.
Thank you very much, Devoe.
All right. We have a message here. It says, please, can you help us? Okay, no. This one's from Jacob from Ajah. It says, good morning, Q. Why did he remove the Commissioner of Police in Plateau State? The herdsmen fight is far beyond just police. Let the president declare them terrorists so the Nigerian army could face them just like they did the Boko Haram. With hashtag freshlypressed981, you can send your messages to us on Twitter. This one is from Remy Martin. It said, good morning. Well, in terms of security of our government, the government needs to act fast. Plateau herdsmen are not smiling. My complaint is registered with the NIMC national ID. They're saying my younger brother's BVN and date of birth are not updated on the bank database.
Interesting. Thank you very much for that, Remy. Devoe, I'm very interested to know what your thoughts are with regards to this particular story. Some people would say, and I have seen theorists across the world sort of say that financial literacy or financial education specifically is important for people globally. And globally, a lot of people are not financially educated and were made literate in one way or another. But in terms of understanding money and managing it, a lot of us are lacking. What are your thoughts?
This is a superlative news coming from the CBN, although I would have wished that the Ministry of Education got here before the Finance Ministry did. But it's never too late, and this is on account of, as you know, what has been going on, and the CBN is trying to strengthen financial literacy. Now, as mentioned, this is aimed at creating awareness in the issue of financial management, drive it to the end, conclusive, and we begin to see it in our books, and our children come back home telling us that you could have made a better investment doing A, B, and C.
What would be nice to see is actually demand that the Ministry of Education as well as CBN kind of start releasing the curriculum. We should see a demand for the curriculum for our schools each year across the board. The same way we demand to see budgets, we need to start demanding to see what we're teaching ourselves and educating our children about.
Especially now that Nigeria has been ranked as the world's poorest country.
Oh dear.
What better way to get us out of poverty? Now move on to Guardian newspaper. It has this story. The headline reads, Federal government says the national water bill will be beneficial to Nigerians. So the federal government is saying this, that the National Water Resources Bill, that drafted in 2008 by the National Assembly, says it will be beneficial for everyone whenever it is signed into law. So we're waiting for this to see this enacted or drafted as it's really put forward on this report. Devoe, what's your take on this story?
Once again, we're discussing issues of governance and democratic dividends. And in most cases, like you mentioned last time, instead of dealing on the ideal, we are discussing the politics of it. Here, a water bill was revived, so to speak, about the management and the control of resources among the waters that surround Nigeria, within inland and actually external. And there was a huge kickback against it, especially from the opposition, and the fact from the likes of PDP, who said that because of the failed open grazing policy, that the federal government wants to institute another means of controlling the South-South, and especially some of the other states' properties, which many of the states kicked against. Now, here, the Ministry of Water Resources is trying to explain, trying to break it down, that what was said was nothing new, that it had been in the existing laws, that what they're simply trying to do is to make it more effective, that they expected that those who were in opposition to ask questions as to how this would be implemented. Now, he did state that the Commission has drawn up relevant criteria for the issuance of water permits, corporate governance of the water sector in Nigeria. The criteria is to protect, conserve, control water resources for equitable and sustainable socio-economic development, as well as maintain environmental integrity. Now, all that sounds good, right?
It sounds good on paper.
Sounds good, right?
But my question is, how? What's holding this back from being implemented? We see that the sectors like power, for instance, there's been discussions going on how to privatize and bring as much private companies into the mix to see how they can, better make sure this power is available to every Nigerian. How about applying it to the water?
Well, you see, the problem with water was that while water still remains among the exclusive list, the implementation still falls within the powers of the state governments, and they're the ones vehemently against it, that no, you cannot come and control my water again, having taken oil. Remember, they've taken oil, they've taken land, they've taken
but you cannot control what you don't have.
Wrong.
How about making it available first?
They're in power of, they have the authority over the land, they have the authority over the solid minerals and resources, and petroleum and crude oil anywhere it's found. So in this case, they're saying, no, you are not going to take the water from us. Well, let's see how the debate goes. What I expect is, because funny enough, why is it coming up now? One, do you get water from the water resources?
No,
I don't.
I don't remember the last time.
Many Nigerians,
most Nigerians provide their own
water. So all of a sudden, there's this fight over the control of water. Really, what is at stake? What is the real interest here? I expect the Water and Ministry Resources, seeing that their initiative has come with backlash, to go about on a town hall, town hall forums around the nation, and try and build some buy-in.
And carry out some consultancy, get people's opinions.
Speak with people. Let's understand what you're really after, and let's know whether it's worth our buy-in or not.
Thank you very much, Devoe. Next story is from Premium Times newspaper. Nigeria pledges 100% implementation of air safety recommendations. So the Minister of State for Aviation, Hadi Sirika, has pledged that the federal government will ensure full implementation of the air safety recommendations released by the Accident Investigation Bureau. And seeing that carriers or the air freight services and even commercial airlines in the country, they've been faced or besieged by problems in recent times. Now, how do we see that the recommendations are implemented pretty soon? Or what's your take on this story pretty much? How is it going to affect the aviation industry?
Well, aviation and safety go in one pot of soup. It's one of the critical areas of industry that safety must be given 150%. Now, we've not had the best history in air safety.
Compliance?
Yes, compliance.
Okay.
But I think there's a move to try and bridge this gap. One of the elements of this AIB report, that's Accident Investigation Bureau, is they are meant to consistently bring out the reports and the indices. Now, what this does is that it's not like they're trying to bring down the airlines or the operators or even the regulators. What they simply do is they keep a record of the status of compliance, the status of how operations are taking place, which attract rewards or even consequences where you are not meeting up. Because in safety, prevention is better than cure. So the minister is right behind this. He's saying this will develop a culture of safety and security consciousness in the nation's industry to meet up with global standards. In the long run, it will attract the necessary investment so that we can even have a safer industry. Now, the AIB chairman, that's the Buri chairman, Akin Olateru, said that since the inception in 2007, there's been 130 safety recommendations, adding that 61% of recommendations have been implemented. So we still have 40% left to go.
Here's my question though: Is implementation implementation? Is it enough, or do we need? Does the government? Are there no ways that the government could lax the policies to attract foreign investment? Safety, yes, is a vital tool, is a vital necessity in the scheme of things. But are there other ways that the government could actually encourage foreign investment?
There are other ways, because remember, at the end of the day, first of all, without their own efforts, they're facing the issue of foreign exchange, which the CBN has tried to bridge the gap, meaning some of them could not go for their safety test, not because they didn't want to, but they couldn't get the dollars to.
Yes.
Now that's being driven. But for a long time, that was delayed. Secondly, accidental accident reports. There have been a few incidents in the past which were all well documented, but the accident reports came out quite late. Why? Why was this? Because the longer it takes to produce the reports, the further away the other industry players don't have the information to be able to work with and to create the preventable. Like, for example, if we are aware that it's because of the lack of fuel or aviation fuel, then maybe Air Traffic Control can stop flights from some certain areas. Two, the NCA also cried that there's a need for increased manpower. So the manpower has been the biggest challenge.
Yes.
In most of the locations, they don't have adequate manpower, talk less of equipment. So these are all safety concerns. At the end of the day, if you don't have the right equipment, if you don't have the right gadgets, or if your gadgets are outdated or not updated, then you are running a risk. Not just to the operators, but to us as passengers.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Devoe. Move on now to another story. This time is from Guardian newspaper. Boko Haram homeless face housing crisis as rains hit. The weather is changing. NEMA has come out with a report to let us know that in some parts of the country they'll be experiencing rains and flooding in total. So thousands of men, women, and children made homeless by the Boko Haram insurgency risk disease such as cholera. We have malaria and everything plaguing them. And we see that according to a Norwegian Refugee Council report, that over 4,000 people are sleeping in the open. What's your take, Devoe?
This news is actually coming from the Norwegian Refugee Council, that's stating that in their own investigation, they're noticing that with the rains and with the climate change, many of the IDPs are leaving the camps, which are not suitable for them, and trying to return to their homes. But in that instance, they're having to sleep outside, they're having to sleep in very inhumane conditions, which are quite close to Maiduguri. Some of them are gathering in locations that they don't even have health or security around them.
But the precise point of focus is Dikwa in Borno State.
Yes, Dikwa is just where they reported. I know this crisis extends to all other aspects. If you do remember,
that's right.
Just like the American crisis of detention of immigrants, we have ID camps scattered all over the country, as far as Edo State, that we don't get reports on, that we don't know what has happened to them. Taking one meal to them does not address 10% of their issues.
That's right.
All right, let's see if we can go to a couple of messages very quickly. Walter from Igondo sent in this message up on WhatsApp saying that, good morning, crew. In Nigeria, voters' turnout has actually always been higher in the crises area than the so-called peaceful places, says Walter. Very interesting. While this one comes in from Ike, who says, how would the security forces go after Mieti Allah chaps when they're busy with phantom terrorist group IPOB? Comments on our youth and drugs. Big T says, they have no social welfare, no jobs, they're beaten up by SARS, there's no money, there's no light, there's no capital, etc., etc. So they're looking for an escape. They can't afford to go abroad, so they fly locally using drugs. Fix the real problems, he says. Fabia from Lekki mentions up on WhatsApp, so we are now the poorest country in the world, or is it Africa? Either way, what an irony. How much further do we need to sink before we realize as citizens that we need to actively demand for change? How do we really do this effectively to push that change? I fear that a lot of what we do in terms of advocacy is just lip service. As for me, I will continue to pray for Nigeria in distress, as we do in church every Sunday. It is well, the continual refrain.
Thank you very much. As a means of mention, we'll take this story on news New Telegraph newspaper. NPA revenue from vehicle import drops by 20%. We noted that the past administration had a tax rebate on semi-knockdown cars and completely knockdown cars imports in the country, just to promote local investment in cars production. What's your take on this story?
Is 1 + 1 is 2, not 4. So when you hike duties to what they did, and then you clamp down on the year that they could even bring in, you have more or less reduced your pot of gold. So at the end of the day, we've not completely contained our borders, but the ports are receiving a 20% drop in revenue. And the DG, is it the DG? Yes, the managing director is saying that we can't lose in both ways, but we will, in one instance, still strengthen our capacity to keep the right imports coming in whilst we look at ways to improve revenue.
Thank you very much, Devoe.
And on that note, we're actually done with our newspaper analysis for this morning inside of Freshly Pressed. A big thank you to everyone who sent in messages. Apologies if we couldn't get to all your messages. It's just time constraints. You know how it happens sometimes. But do stay with us because, of course, at 9 o'clock, we will be opening up our phone lines to have a deeper conversation about one of these stories of national import. But until then, at 8:15, we will be talking sports inside the locker room with Tega. You are listening to Smooth Breakfast with Valentine
and Folu.
Good morning.
The innovative and smart way. Visit cars45.com today to sell or trade in your car for another one.